containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece, and Africa as the birthplace.
Imagine you're sitting in a modern church, or maybe you're just scrolling late at night on your phone, and you come across this viral video.
Oh yeah, the algorithm loves those late-night rabbit holes.
It really does. So you see this video, and the hosts are talking with just total conviction about UFOs, top secret government disclosures, and how, like, cutting-edge genetic engineering things like CRISPR is actually a demonic plot to alter human DNA.
Right.
And they trace this massive sci-fi sounding conspiracy all the way back to ancient fallen angels, giants called Nephilim, and a literal cosmic rebellion. I mean, it feels like a blockbuster movie, and for a lot of people, it's genuinely terrifying.
It is incredibly compelling because, well, it connects the dots of our modern anxieties using the absolute oldest stories we have.
Exactly. But then I want you to imagine a 19th century Egyptologist tapping you on the shoulder in the middle of this intense apocalyptic presentation, clearing his throat and, politely informing you that all of this, the demons, the giants, the cosmic wars, is actually just a catastrophic misunderstanding of a 5,000-year-old weather report and an ancient star chart.
Yeah, it is the ultimate paradigm shift, and honestly, it requires us to completely dismantle how we think about history, mythology, and frankly, science.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. I'm so glad you're joining us for this deep dive because we are jumping headfirst into one of the most intense, wildly debated topics in modern internet culture and theology. We are conducting a forensic source critical assessment of a massively popular video by Vlad Savchuk and Rikhard Hartikainen. It's titled The Truth About Nephilim, Watchers, and Demons. And just to be clear, we are not going to just summarize their video for you.
No, we're putting every single assertion they make to a rigorous, uncompromising test.
Right. We're going to take their literalist worldview and hold it up against the actual biblical texts in their original languages, mind you.
And crucially, we are going to evaluate all of it through the framework of Gerald Massey.
Yes, the 19th century scholar.
Right, the author of The Natural Genesis, The Book of the Beginnings, and Ancient Egypt. The Light of the World. Massey argued that what we call religious narratives, divine beings, floods, heavens, underworlds, and demons, were originally developed from Egyptian, natural, lunar, solar, stellar, and astronomical allegories.
But I want to be really clear with you, the listener, right up front here. We are not assuming that any theological framework, nor even Massey's skeptical framework, is inherently true in advance.
Exactly. We have to test it all.
And we aren't taking sides on the political aspects of modern UFO disclosures or DNA debates that the video brings up. We are strictly here to analyze the theological and historical mechanics. We're going to use textual criticism, Assyriology, linguistics, and hard science to find the phenomenal origins of these beliefs.
Which means we really need to start where the video starts, right? With the origin of evil itself.
Let's do it.
So, early on in the video, they lay out a very specific narrative about a primary cosmic rebellion. They make the claim, and this is a paraphrase, that Satan, who was originally an exalted angel, rebelled because he wanted to elevate himself above God.
Right, the classic origin story.
Exactly. And they claim he deceived mankind in Genesis 3, but, and they make a huge point of this around the 15-minute mark, they claim he didn't lose his access card to heaven right away.
The access card, yeah.
Right. They argue he maintained a bureaucratic access to the heavenly realms until after the resurrection of Jesus, at which point he was permanently cast down to earth.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the narrative they present feels so familiar to all of us. I mean, it's basically the plot of John Milton's Paradise Lost.
It is, word for word.
But when they try to back this up, they pull from a scattered handful of texts, right? Genesis 3, Job chapters 1 and 2, Revelation 12, and they heavily imply the prophecies in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. So if we actually open up those ancient scrolls and look at the original languages, does that narrative hold together?
When we perform a strict textual analysis, honestly, the foundation of that specific narrative fractures almost immediately.
Really? How so?
Well, let's look at Genesis 3. The Hebrew text features the nahash. This word simply means serpent or snake.
Just a snake.
Just a snake. In the actual text of Genesis, there is no explicit mention of Satan, there's no mention of a cosmic rebellion, and there's certainly no mention of a fallen angel possessing a reptile.
So the idea that this is the devil in disguise.
The identification of the Edenic serpent with a singular cosmic rebel named Satan is a theological development that didn't solidify until centuries later, mainly during the Second Temple period.
Okay, so in the original ancient Near Eastern context of Genesis, a snake was just a snake. I mean, maybe a mythological trickster figure, but not the Prince of Darkness.
Right.
But what about the Book of Job? Because that's the text the video uses to prove this entity still had an access card to heaven. In Job 1 and 2, Satan is literally standing in the heavenly council talking to God.
And this is where translation masks the original meaning. The Hebrew text in Job does not use Satan as a proper name.
It doesn't.
No, it uses the term ha-Satan, which translates to the adversary or the accuser. In the context of ancient Israelite theology, ha-Satan is a title. It's a job description.
Okay, so it's not a guy named Satan.
No. This entity is not a rebel who has been cast out. He is functioning as a subordinate, fully compliant member of Yahweh's divine council. He acts like a prosecuting attorney whose specific divine job is to roam the earth and test the piety of humans.
I've always thought of it like a cosmic HR department, right?
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Like God is the CEO and ha-Satan is the compliance officer. He's auditing Job to make sure the employee is actually doing his job for the right reasons, not just because he's getting bonuses. So the entity in Job isn't rebelling against God at all. He's asking for permission to do his job.
Exactly.
But if that's what the text originally meant, how did we get this grand, sweeping story of an evil mastermind leading a war in heaven? Because the video leans heavily on that idea, implicitly pulling from those famous passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel.
Well, this is a classic case of later tradition synthesizing and retrofitting disparate texts. If we look at Isaiah 14, the text mentions Lucifer in the King James translation, or Hillel ben Shachar, the day star, son of the dawn.
Right.
And Ezekiel 28 talks about a figure in Eden, the garden of God, adorned with jewels. But historically and contextually, both of these passages are political taunts.
Oh, political taunt.
Yes. They are directed at actual historical human kings, the king of Babylon and the king of Tyre. The prophets were using ancient Near Eastern mythological motifs of hubris, specifically Canaanite myths about minor gods trying to usurp the high god, to mock the arrogance of these human rulers who thought they were invincible.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that thousands of years of deep moral theology about the origin of evil, like the literal devil, the fall from grace, is ultimately based on ancient political satire?
Yes, I am.
That Jewish prophets were basically writing the ancient equivalent of a political cartoon, and later readers completely misunderstood it and thought they were reading a literal history of the spiritual realm.
Precisely. It wasn't until the intertestamental period, so the time between the Old and New Testaments, that Jewish theology, which was heavily influenced by Persian Zoroastrian dualism during their exile, synthesized these political taunts with the serpent of Genesis and the accuser of Job.
Wow.
Yeah, they wove them all together to create a comprehensive cosmic origin story for a singular entity called Satan. So by the time we get to the New Testament, when Jesus says in Luke 10, I saw Satan fall like lightning, or when John writes Revelation 12 about the great dragon being cast down, we are looking at a much later apocalyptic synthesis.
So the video is treating this later synthesis as if it were the original unified intent of the ancient authors.
Exactly. They rate the claim based on a later tradition, but textually, the claim is completely unsupported by the original author's intent.
But this is where I really want to bring in Gerald Massey, because even if the prophets were using Canaanite myths as political satire to mock kings, where did the Canaanites get the myth?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. If the fall in heaven wasn't originally about a moral failure of angels, where did the core story come from? How does Massey explain a war in the heavens?
This is where Massey's framework is just breathtakingly brilliant. According to his research in the natural Genesis, the fall in heaven was never originally a moral or historical event. It was an Egyptian astronomical observation.
Astronomy.
Yes. The ancient Egyptians were brilliant scientific naturalists who tracked the cycles of time on a massive scale, what they called the Great Year of the Universe. And this is driven by an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes.
Okay, let's make sure everyone is with us on this because this is crucial. Precession is the wobble of the Earth, right? Like a spinning top that's slowing down the Earth's axis slowly traces a massive circle in the sky over about 26,000 years.
Exactly. And because of this 26,000-year wobble, the star that our North Pole points to, the pole star, changes over millennia.
Right.
Today, our pole star is Polaris. But around 3000 BCE, when the Egyptians were building their earliest monuments, the pole star was a star called Thuban, or Alpha Draconis, which is in the constellation of Draco the Dragon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. For ancient astronomers, Thuban sat at the absolute exalted mount of the North Pole. The entire night sky literally revolved around the dragon. But due to precession over thousands of years, Thuban was superseded. It appeared to slip away, to slowly fall from its exalted primary position at the center of the heavens.
That is mind-blowing. So ancient astronomers depicted this gradual shifting of the stars as a dragon or serpent falling from the mount of the pole.
Yep.
It wasn't a sin. It was astrophysics explained through the language of mythology. The dragon was cast down by the mechanics of the solar system.
Yes. And Massey goes further in ancient Egypt, the light of the world. He explains that the physical figure of Satan actually derives from the Egyptian deity Sut, also known in Greek as Typhon.
Okay.
Sut was the red-haired god of the desert, of drought, of the wilderness. He represented the physical environment that threatened Egyptian survival. The original conflict was entirely elemental. Light versus darkness, the life-giving waters of the Nile versus the barren desert, the sun god Ra fighting the apap reptile of darkness every single night to bring the dawn.
I see the mechanism here. The Egyptians are using this incredibly poetic, symbolic language to record scientific and environmental facts.
Exactly.
But then, as millennia pass and empires rise and fall, that knowledge gets dispersed. Neighboring cultures, the Canaanites, the Babylonians, early Israelites, they encounter these stories or see these temple carvings of a red dragon being cast down, or a red-haired god battling the sun. And because they don't have the scientific key to understand the astronomy, they literalize it.
That is the tragic irony Massey points out. It is European ignorance and primitive ideology that misunderstood Egyptian science as magic. They turned natural phenomenal myths into historical and moral occurrences purely due to a lack of scientific understanding.
So our verdict on the claims made by Savchuk and Hartikainen about a literal cosmic rebellion.
They are completely dependent on a later theological synthesis. They retrofit Second Temple theology onto older texts that were originally grounded in ancient astronomical observations.
Wow. Okay, so if the primary rebellion is a misunderstanding of a wobbling Earth and a falling star, then what about the other angels that supposedly fell? Because the video spends a massive amount of time on Genesis 6 and the so-called Second Rebellion, the descent of the Watchers.
Yes, the Watcher narrative is absolutely central to their worldview.
So let's get into their claim. The video claims that a group of angels, referred to as Watchers or Sons of God, came down to Mount Hermon, swore a blood oath together, and traded secret heavenly knowledge with humanity, things like metallurgy, cosmetics, and sorcery in exchange for human women.
Right around the 25-minute mark, they go deep into this.
And they say these angels slept with these women, and this unholy union corrupted the human genome, producing physical hybrid giants called the Nephilim. Whenever I hear this story, it sounds like the script for an ancient fantasy epic, but we have to ask, is that epic actually in the Bible? Let's open Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. What does the text explicitly say?
Well, the Hebrew text is surprisingly brief. It says that the Bnei HaElohim, the sons of God, saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they took any they chose as wives.
Right.
It then says the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the Gibberim, the heroes of old, men of renown.
Okay, I'm looking at that text, and I have a major question. Does Genesis 6 explicitly identify the Nephilim as the biological hybrid children of these divine beings and women? Because the way you just read it, it sounds like two separate statements.
You've hit on a major debate in biblical scholarship. The text juxtaposes the two events, but it does not explicitly declare a hybrid biological origin.
It doesn't.
No, it just says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of men. Furthermore, let's look at the word Nephilim. It comes from the Hebrew root nephal, which means to fall.
So fallen ones.
It can mean the fallen ones, or it can mean those who fall upon others, as in fierce warriors or raiders.
So they might just be ancient, brutal warlords.
Exactly.
But more importantly, the entire narrative about angels swearing a pact on a mountain, trading secret knowledge, teaching humans how to make swords and makeup, and intentionally corrupting human DNA, none of that is in Genesis 6. So where are the video hosts getting all this incredibly specific detail?
They're pulling it directly from the later Aramaic Iron or Watchers traditions.
The extra-biblical stuff.
Right. This incredibly rich narrative is found in extra-biblical texts like 1 Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Book of Giants, which were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. These texts were written centuries after Genesis, largely during the Hellenistic period.
So it's much later.
Much later. Now, to be fair to the video, they are relying on a very popular Second Temple Jewish interpretation. The Enochic literature deeply influenced early Christian writers. But there are alternative readings of Genesis 6 that the text supports just as well.
Right, like the Sethite view, which says the sons of God were just righteous human descendants of Seth who married wicked descendants of Cain. Or the royal tyrant view, which argues these were ancient human kings who set up harems, claiming divine right. The video explicitly rejects those human-centric views and fully embraces the Enochic Watcher tradition.
They do, but from a critical standpoint, we must recognize that they are reading the expansive mythology of 1 Enoch backward into the incredibly sparse text of Genesis 6.
But if we apply Massey's framework here, we have to look for the scientific, phenomenal origins of this story. Because if they weren't literal angels trading secrets and having illicit relations with human women, what were the Watchers?
Massey's application here is one of his strongest. According to the Book of the Beginnings, the Watchers who fell were the 7 elementaries, or the timekeepers of ancient Egyptian astronomy.
Timekeepers.
Yes, the Egyptians established time, periods, and the calendar using the predictable movements of the stars. The celestial bodies were literally the watchers of the night sky, keeping the cosmic order, or mat.
Okay, so the stars are the Watchers. But how do stars fall and, have children?
The fallen ones, which later became the Nephilim, represented celestial bodies or cycles that failed to keep correct time. Think about the complexity of ancient calendars.
Oh, it was a mess back then.
Right. The Egyptians originally had a 360-day calendar and later had to add 5 epagomenal days to sync it with the 365-day solar year. Before they perfected this, the calendar would drift. Certain stars or planetary bodies, the wanderers, would fall out of their expected seasonal alignment.
They fell.
They fell. And Massey explicitly states that the offspring of these failed timekeepers were considered abortions, or Typhonian powers.
Wait, abortions? That's an intense word to use for a calendar drift.
In the metaphorical sense, yes. Massey means they were figures of chaotic, non-periodic natural forces. Because the celestial timekeepers failed, their offspring, the resulting days or cycles, represented chaos in the calendar and in nature. The mythology used physiological imagery like illegitimate birth or corrupted seeds to describe a breakdown in the natural astronomical order.
So it's literally an allegory for a broken calendar.
Exactly. But later cultures, lacking the astronomical context, read this highly symbolic scientific language and literalized it into a bizarre history about angels having sex with human women.
I just want to pause and appreciate how much more elegant Massey's explanation is. Instead of a sci-fi horror story about DNA corruption, it's early humanity trying to mathematically synchronize the movements of the heavens.
It's beautiful, really.
It is. So the video's claim about Genesis 6 is plausible within the context of later Enochic tradition, but under Massey's scientific and typological lens, we have to rate it as completely anachronistic. It projects biology onto astronomy.
Which leads us perfectly into the video's next major claim.
Right, because if the Nephilim were physical hybrids and God sent the flood of Noah to wipe out their corrupted bodies, what happened to their spirits? The video attempts to connect these ancient drowned giants directly to the exorcisms performed by Jesus in the New Testament and by modern deliverance ministries today.
Yes, the logic the video uses is wild. They claim that the evil spirits or demons that are cast out of people today are actually the disembodied ghosts of the Nephilim.
And their reasoning is that because the Nephilim were unauthorized hybrids, God cursed them so their spirits couldn't pass on to the afterlife. Therefore, they are doomed to linger on Earth with an insatiable desire to possess physical bodies, unlike proper angels, who are fully spirit and don't crave a meat suit, basically.
Right. But to assess this, we have to demand strict textual evidence. Does the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament explicitly identify demons? In Greek, daimonion or pneuma akatharton, which means unclean spirits, as the ghosts of dead Nephilim?
And
The definitive answer is no.
nowhere, not in any of the Gospels.
Nowhere in the canonical texts. When you read the gospel accounts of Jesus' exorcisms in Mark 1, Mark 5, or Matthew 12, the writers simply treat demons as hostile spiritual realities. Jesus commands the pneuma akathartan to leave, but he never stops to give a theological lecture explaining that they are the ghosts of drowned giants from Genesis.
Okay, but what about the Old Testament?
Furthermore, the Old Testament anthropology of the soul, the ruach or breath of life, doesn't even support the idea of hybrid ghosts lingering on Earth. Once the ruach is gone, the body is dead. There is no middle state of hybrid ghost demons roaming around.
So the video is basically taking the Book of Enoch's lore, which does claim demons are the spirits of giants, and pasting it over the New Testament.
Yes, exactly.
But what about the epistles? Because the video points to Jude and Peter talking about angels in chains.
And this is where we really must untangle the conflation of terms. The video lumps together fallen angels, demons, unclean spirits, pagan gods, and deceased giants into one giant bucket of evil. But the texts differentiate them.
How so?
When we look at Jude verse 6, or 2 Peter 2.4, or 1 Peter 3.822, these texts refer to sinning angels, angelos, being locked away in a spiritual prison, or Tartarus. They are explicitly bound in chains in gloomy darkness until the judgment.
Oh.
By the text's own definition, they are not roaming the earth seeking bodies to possess. They are locked up.
I have to push back on the video's logic here, just purely on a mathematical and logistical level, because if you're listening to this and thinking, wait a minute, how does that work? The video itself admits this dilemma. Let's say there were a few 100,000 Nephilim alive during the days of Noah, concentrated in the ancient Near East. The flood wipes them out. How do you get the millions, perhaps billions, of demons that modern deliverance ministries claim are possessing people all over the globe today?
It's a huge numbers problem.
It is, and the hosts in the video actually speculate that maybe demons are still reproducing today through spirit spouses, like incubi and succubi having intimate relations with humans in their dreams to generate more demonic spirits.
It is a staggering leap of logic.
It is! I mean, you are building an entire Dungeons & Dragons mechanics manual just to patch a theological plot hole. If you literalize a myth, you inevitably have to invent increasingly absurd mechanics like dream reproduction just to keep the math working.
And this is the danger of what happens when primitive sociology and theology attempt to interpret the natural world without science. You end up with ghost reproduction to explain mental illness or bad luck.
So where do the concepts of demons actually come from if they aren't the ghosts of giants? Let's apply Massey's linguistic and typological analysis here.
Well, look at the Hebrew word for demons, shadim. It appears in the Old Testament, usually in the context of idolatry, like in Deuteronomy.
Okay, where does shadim trace back to in the Egyptian record?
Massey traces the Hebrew shadim back to the Egyptian word kefti.
Kefti.
Yes, the Keftis were associated with the hinder part, or the northwest, and they were connected to the goddess of the seven stars, Ursa Major. These demons were originally elemental nature powers, specifically the seven Uri, or serpents of life. They represented primitive weather patterns, eclipses, and astronomical cycles that brought hardship.
So they were ancient meteorological symbols.
Yes. But the Babylonians and the early Hebrews misunderstood this Egyptian zoomorphic sign language. When they saw the iconography of the seven Uri, these powerful, unpredictable forces of nature, they transmogrified them into seven evil spirits of theology.
Oh, wow.
The sicknesses, the sudden storms, the mental afflictions that ancient people couldn't explain scientifically were attributed to these transmogrified nature powers. They were never dead giants. They were representations of the physical elements that early humanity was trying to categorize.
It sounds like the video's claim about demons being dead Nephilim is totally unsupported by the biblical canon and relies entirely on intertestamental lore.
Completely unsupported.
And scientifically, it completely misunderstands the phenomenal nature myths. But if we follow their logic for a second, that these demons are the lingering ghosts of physical hybrids, it forces us to ask what those bodies actually look like in life. And that brings us to the terrifying accounts of the giants themselves.
Yes, the physical descriptions. The video claims that the Nephilim were massive physical giants, anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall, or even up to 30 feet tall, who literally roamed the earth. They argue that God had to send the flood specifically to wipe out this corrupted, gigantic DNA, and they point heavily to Numbers 13.33.
Right, the famous story of the Israelite spies. So Moses sends 12 spies into the land of Canaan. 10 of them come back absolute terrified. We report seeing the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, and they say, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And the video notes that when the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, the Septuagint translators used the word gigantes.
But we really have to analyze the literary context of Numbers 13. We must recognize that this report is explicitly framed by the author as a fear-based, highly exaggerated claim made by unreliable narrators.
Unreliable narrators.
Absolutely. The 10 spies are terrified. They are actively inciting a rebellion against Moses. The text is portraying them as cowards who are blowing things way out of proportion to avoid going into a fortified land. Taking the grasshopper comment as a literal mathematical height comparison completely misses the psychological hyperbole of the text.
That makes total sense. They're just scared out of their minds. But what about the Greek word gigantes? Doesn't that prove they were at least considered giants by the translators?
Not in the way modern English uses the word. When Jewish scholars in Alexandria translated the Hebrew scriptures into Greek in the 3rd century BCE, they used the word gigantes, which literally means earthborn ones.
Earthborn ones.
Yes, they were actively mapping Greek titanomachy, the myth of the Titans who rebelled against the Olympian gods, onto the Hebrew text. They were trying to make the text culturally comprehensible to a Hellenized audience. It was a translation choice, not a biological diagnosis.
Okay, so the biblical text is using psychological hyperbole, and the translators use cultural equivalents. But again, we have to look for the root. Where does the underlying concept of a massive giant truly originate? If we look at Massey's work, he points us to something called the Egyptian Amenta. Can you explain what that is?
The Amenta is the Egyptian underworld. But it wasn't just a place for the dead. It was the mythical subterrestrial landscape that the sun god Ra traversed every single night from west to east. It was fraught with dangers, trials, and monsters that the soul had to navigate to achieve resurrection.
Sounds terrifying.
It was. And Massey points out that the various giant tribes mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, the Rephaim, the Anakim, the Emim, and the Zamzummim map perfectly to the Amam of the Egyptian Book of the Dead.
The Amma, what were they?
The Amam were literally the devourers. They were terrifying, monstrous entities of the underworld. And in the Egyptian texts, they're explicitly described as being 8 or 9 cubits tall.
Wait, 9 cubits is roughly 13 to 14 feet. That is exactly the immense height often attributed to biblical giants like King Og of Bashan, so it's a direct parallel.
It is a stunning parallel, but here is the critical mechanism of how the myth was altered. The Egyptian Amam were non-human inhabitants of the subterrestrial underworld.
Right.
They were mythological, spiritual obstacles. They were never considered historical, physical beings living on the surface of the earth. But what happened? The Hebrews, who either emerged from Egypt or absorbed its cultural artifacts, historically localized the mythical geography of the Egyptian afterlife.
I want to make sure I understand this. You're saying they took the spiritual map of the afterlife and laid it over the physical map of the Middle East.
Precisely. They took the spiritual underworld of Amenta and turned it into the physical land of Canaan. The spiritual giants that a soul had to face after death became physical giant tribes that an army had to fight to conquer a physical promised land. They flattened a profound spiritual eschatology into a historical war diary.
That is tragic, honestly. They lost the spiritual poetry and replaced it with historical genocide. So the claim of literal 15-foot historical giants roaming the earth is historically unverified. We have to rate it as speculative, resulting from geographically literalizing Egyptian eschatology.
Which brings up a major theological problem for the video's timeline. If the flood wiped out all the physical giants, how does the video explain the continuing spiritual conflict on earth? Because remember, they claim Satan doesn't fall until the time of Jesus. This leads to their explanation of the post-flood third rebellion at the Tower of Babel.
Yes, the video leans very heavily on what modern scholars call the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. They claim that at Babel, humanity rebelled, and as a punishment, God disinherited the nations of the world. He divided them up and assigned them to be ruled by lesser Elohim, or principalities.
And then what happened?
Well, according to the video, these lesser gods then rebelled, demanded worship from humans, and still rule over geographical territories today, causing wars and chaos. They back this up with Deuteronomy 32.8-9, Psalm 82, where God judges the gods, and Daniel 10, which famously talks about an angel one of the Malachim fighting the Prince of Persia, and of course Colossians 2.15 and Ephesians 6 about principalities.
Right. Now, from a purely textual standpoint, The video is actually accurately representing the academic divine council worldview, which has been popularized in recent years by scholars like Michael Heiser.
Did they got this one right?
Well, textually, yes. If you look at the Dead Sea Scrolls version of Deuteronomy 32, it explicitly says God divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God, the Beni Elohim. The later Masoretic text changed this to sons of Israel to soften the polytheistic undertones, but the older text is clear, and Paul's language in Ephesians and Colossians clearly speaks of spiritual territorial authorities. The video is not misrepresenting the biblical text on this point. The ancient Israelite worldview did encompass this idea.
Okay, so the Bible does support their view of territorial spiritual rulers, but we're going deeper here. I am playing the role of the skeptical proxy here. Where did the ancient Hebrews get the concept of exactly 70 nations being ruled by exactly 70 rebel princes? That is a very specific mathematical cosmology.
And mathematics always points back to astronomy. Massey explains in The Light of the World that the ancient Egyptians divided the Earth into 7 climates, and each climate had 10 parts, equating to 70 degrees or decans.
Wow, 70 decans.
Yes. The 70 princes of later Hebrew theology were originally the 70 Typhonian powers derived from the Great Mother in Egyptian cosmology. Furthermore, the term Elohim derives from the Egyptian Ali, meaning companions. They were the original 7 elemental molders or creators, representing the 7 visible planetary spheres.
So when the text in Daniel talks about the Prince of Persia, or Psalm 82 talks about these principalities rebelling and failing to rule justly, it's actually talking about stars and planets. How does a planet rebel?
The rebellion of these principalities is a theological misinterpretation of orbital mechanics.
You're kidding.
No, seriously. The ancients observed that certain stars ruled different territories of the night sky at different times of the year. When those stars moved out of their seasonal positions due to precession, retrograde motion, or orbital mechanics, early mythmakers described them as rebelling or abandoning their assigned stations. The stars were failing to execute justice, meaning they're failing to keep the time. It was a brilliant way of tracking astronomy, not a history of demonic territorial managers influencing geopolitics.
So the biblical authors were using astronomical blueprints to explain political turmoil. The text absolutely says what the video claims it says, but the texts themselves are derived from astronomical allegories that were fundamentally misunderstood. So we write that explicitly supported by the text, but anachronistic in origin.
Exactly. And understanding the disconnect is vital as we move into the climax of the video, where they take these ancient texts and project them directly into the 21st century.
This is where we leave ancient history and step right into the modern panic room. In the final act of the video, Savchuk and Hartikainen cover UFOs, aliens, and transhumanism.
Right, the end times deception.
Yeah, they claim that the coming end times deception will perfectly mirror the days of Noah. They argue that UFOs and aliens are not extraterrestrial biological entities, but are actually demonic, interdimensional entities, the exact same watchers or their offspring returning.
And they connect this to modern medicine, correct?
Yes, and this is where it gets incredibly tense. They suggest there will be a push to alter human DNA using technologies like CRISPR or modern vaccines. They claim the goal is to create human chimeras, thereby removing the image of God from humanity, making us unredeemable to prepare for the mark of the beast and the Antichrist. They pull this directly from their literal reading of the Genesis 6 hybridization narrative and Revelation 20.
I need to carefully identify the cascading series of logical leaps occurring here.
Let's do it.
First, the video assumes that the ancient watchers literally altered human genetics, projecting Watson and Crick's 20th century discovery of DNA onto a Bronze Age text. Second, it assumes that the end times will perfectly repeat this specific genetic alteration. Third, it categorizes all modern unexplained phenomena like UFOs as the exact same ancient spiritual entities. And finally, it links modern medical technology to apocalyptic prophecy.
I want to reiterate our ground rules here. The video talks about woke ideologies, DNA manipulation, and government cover-ups. We are strictly analyzing the theological mechanics of how they arrive at these conclusions. We aren't taking a political side. But analytically speaking, none of this is actually in the Bible, right? The Bible doesn't mention double helixes or flying saucers.
I will state this as clearly as possible. No biblical text speaks of UFOs, aliens, transhumanism, or DNA manipulation. What we are witnessing in this video is a purely modern sociological phenomenon. It is the use of ancient, misunderstood texts to process deep, existential anxiety about rapid technological and social change.
So how would Massey view this? If the ancient Egyptians were here watching this video about CRISPR and UFOs, what would they say?
Massey would view this as the ultimate tragic example of primitive ideology misunderstanding science as magic. The ancient Egyptians were scientific naturalists. To explain complex scientific or natural truths, they use what Massey calls zootypes.
I have to interrupt. A zootype, what exactly is that? Like a shorthand emoji for a complex scientific idea?
That is a perfect analogy. A zootype is the use of an animal symbol to codify a natural phenomenon. For example, they use the frog to symbolize transformation and resurrection because they observe the frog metamorphose from a water-breathing tadpole into a land-dwelling amphibian.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. They use the scarab beetle, which buries its dung ball in the earth from which new life emerges, to symbolize the sinking sun and its eventual rebirth. They weren't worshiping a literal frog or a literal beetle. They were using them as an iconography of metamorphosis. They were using nature to explain nature.
So they created symbols based on observation, but what is the video doing?
The video is doing the exact opposite. It is taking ancient sign language, which was originally designed to explain natural, observable cycles, and projecting it literally onto modern science out of a sheer lack of scientific understanding. The video is treating ancient poetic metaphors as if they are biological blueprints for 21st century genetic engineering. It is anachronistic in the extreme.
They are looking at an ancient emoji of a star falling and thinking it's a schematic for a demonic UFO. It's wild. When you look at the entire arc of their presentation, they take a hyper-literal view of ancient mythology, and the result is an exhausting, fear-based worldview.
It really is exhausting.
It is. If you believe their claims, you live in a world filled with roaming Nephilim ghosts trying to possess you, rebellious territorial managers controlling your nation, and demonic UFOs preparing to alter your DNA. It's a terrifying universe where the shadows are constantly out to get you, and you are always on the defensive.
But contrast that with the profound scientific naturalism of the ancient world, as revealed by Massey.
It's night and day.
The stories that we casually dismiss as myths were actually brilliant. Early attempts by humanity to track astronomy, to understand the turning of the seasons, and to codify human development. When we use science and typology to strip away the theological perversions and the historical ignorance that turn natural myths into literal monsters, we don't find demons waiting in the dark. We find a deep, beautiful, and rational connection to the natural world. The Egyptians were trying to understand their environment, not hide from cosmic bogeymen.
And for you, the listener, understanding the true origins of these stories is incredibly freeing. It frees you from the paralyzing grip of information overload, and it frees you from the fear of these massive cosmic conspiracies. You don't have to worry that a Nephilim ghost from Noah's flood is hiding in your bedroom, or that a modern medical treatment is going to change you into a demonically altered chimera. You can appreciate the biblical texts as profound literature and ancient cosmology without forcing them to be modern science textbooks or news reports.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is understood in its proper historical and scientific context.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. We look back at ancient people, the Babylonians, the early Israelites, the Greeks, and we think they were primitive or superstitious for viewing the weather as battling gods, or for using animal symbols to describe the stars. We judge them for literalizing the mythology.
We do.
But look at how we are treating artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and unexplained aerial phenomena today. Are modern internet conspiracy theories about DNA and aliens just the 21st century's version of primitive myth-making? Are we, right now, creating new demons and new zoo types simply because we've forgotten how to read the sign language of nature? I wonder if, 5,000 years from now, someone will look back at our internet videos and realize we were doing the exact same thing we accused the ancients of doing.
It's a fascinating cycle. We crave precision, but we often end up looking at the world through the murky lens of our own modern anxieties.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring your sources, keep asking the hard questions, and the next time you look up at the stars, try looking at them with fresh eyes. We'll see you next time.
Containing an attempt to recover and reconstitute the lost origins of the myths and mysteries, types and symbols, religion and language, with Egypt for the mouthpiece and Africa as the birthplace.